This is a clip that I hadn't yet seen, and it's absolutely fascinating. It's a conversation between Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and Ben Shapiro. It aired a while back, but here Prime Minister Netanyahu explains his father's role in actually trying to persuade America to accept the re-establishment and support the re-establishment of a Jewish state. And he shares this fascinating story, which I really wasn't so aware of before, and I'm sure many of the viewers might not be aware of it. Have a watch of this absolutely fascinating discussion where you learn a lot more about Netanyahu and about Israel's history.
So he wanted to persuade the world that there's a need to make the Jewish state. He went to...
He's talking about his father.
Jabotinsky was the founder of my movement. He was 60 years old. He was in London, and he was agitating to persuade Britain to recognize a Jewish state, which they refused to do. They closed the gates of this country. They wouldn't allow Jewish immigration. They were against the Arabs. And my father went to Jabotinsky in London. He said, "You have the right idea, but you're in the wrong place." And he said, "Why?" He said, "Because you should be in America." He said, "Why America?" He said, "Because America will be the rising power in the world. There may be a world conflict. America will emerge as the great power, and America can make Britain do what Britain doesn't want to do. That is, recognize a Jewish state." Well, they went to America. Jabotinsky died, and my father continued alone during the during the war years, agitating for Zionism. He was all of 32. And he began, that's in 1942. He decided to do something that no Jewish leader did before. He went to the Republicans. And he went to Senator Taft, who was a very great senator, because Roosevelt would not hear of a Jewish state. He was absolutely opposed to it. He didn't want to antagonize the British. He thought that the British wanted to cater to the Arabs. He simply would not do it. He was a great leader, but it was for the Jewish people, that wasn't good. So not being able to persuade the Democrats, he went to the Republicans. And he said to Senator Taft to advocate, to put in the Republican National Convention on the platform, support for unrestricted Jewish immigration and a Jewish state. Well, Roosevelt didn't like it, but 3 months later, he had no choice. The Democratic National Convention adopted a similar platform. So in many ways, my father was the progenitor of the bipartisan American support for Israel. But of course, he didn't just work on public opinion, but he worked also on the generals and on the politicians, and he went from one to the other. Claire Booth Luce, the wife of the publisher of Time magazine, who was a congresswoman, brilliant woman, she opened doors for him. And so he was taken first to the lowest official in the State Department. His name was Loy Henderson. He was responsible for the Middle East. And they started bringing him up. He brought him to Dean Acheson, who was the acting Secretary of State, and eventually they brought him to Eisenhower. After the war, he was the commander of the army, okay? And they heard from him something that they never heard before. Never heard before. And Eisenhower asked him, "Why should we support you?" He said, "Because the war has ended. The Soviet Union is going to walk into the Middle East. The Arab countries are not only not going to be an obstacle, they'll cooperate with them. And we, in the Jewish state of Israel, will be the bastion of the West, bastion of Western interests and Western values in the heart of the Middle East, to block the Soviet takeover of the Middle East." And Eisenhower looked at him. Eisenhower was my father describes him as a sort of very open-minded, very logical American patriot. So he asked him, "How are you going to be the bastion? You're only 600,000. And my father said to him, "General, you've just seen in 2 world wars how we Jews fight for others. Can you imagine how strong we'll be when we fight for ourselves?" Well, Eisenhower was very much impressed by that, because he got the whole general staff for a second meeting with my father. And he wanted to have a third meeting with the British envoy to persuade Britain to change their attitudes. The Brits nixed that, but it tells you his perspective. You work on public opinion and you work on the officials. Public opinion, you appeal to justice. Officials, you appeal to interest. And the two merge.
Well, obviously, you've taken up a lot of those lessons in your own career. So you can see the transition and the transformation of the State of Israel. I've only visited the State of Israel 4 times. over the course of my life. I visited first in 2000. It was during the second Intifada. And then I visited when I got married in 2008. And I visited 3 years ago and now. And you can see the massive transformations that have happened over the course of that time period, in large part thanks to the fact that you, as the finance minister and then as the prime minister, made such economic decisions in the state of Israel. The growth here is just extraordinary.
Well, the first thing I look at it when I
So I'm going to pause there because obviously they're moving on to a different topic. But this is just so fascinating just to see how much diplomacy Netanyahu kind of grew up with and was familiar with. And I found that really interesting where he talks about interests and justice. See, let's not forget that. Let's not forget that here, when he's talking to diplomats, they had to use the language of interests. But let's not mistake, and viewers who are watching this, do not mistake this idea of Israel being some kind of a useful state for Western interests. Let's not mistake that with being the just reason for Israel's existence. The just reason for Israel's existence is because it's a fixing of a 2,000-year-old injustice of the Jewish people having been forcefully exiled and displaced from their ancient historical God-given homeland. And that is what the re-establishment of Israel is about. There didn't have to be any violence or force. It could have happened very peacefully with two groups of people living side by side. But one side chose war. One side chose to say, we will not accept any Jewish sovereignty, despite the fact that there's never been a people with such a strong claim to a plot of land. But anyway, it's just an interesting video to learn about the diplomatic movings that took place behind the scenes. And I think that point about interests and justice is very poignant and very insightful to how all these things work behind the scenes. Hi, thank you so much for watching. To watch another one, click here. To stay up to date with all our content, click here to subscribe. And if you're able to, you can help support JTV to grow and grow by clicking join below this video, where you can become a member and get perks including early access to videos and private live discussions with me. But most of all, you'll be partnering with us on our mission to change the world.